quick word about the last exam. I haven't had a chance yet to regrade the ones that people made comments on, asked me to regrade certain questions, like the cognitive one. I haven't had a chance. They're sitting on my desk. They're a thing I'm going to try and get to today. So, stay tuned for an update on the grade. When I finish regrading them, I will repost those grades on First Class. Speaking of First Class, occasionally I add a few slides at the last minute, like on this packet. This is number 5, I think, whatever. And so this morning I deleted the old lot, the old packet, and put the new packet on, but it didn't go on. I don't know what happened. It said uploaded, finished, and I looked on the folder. It wasn't in there. I don't know what's going on, but I'll try again this after, straight after that. So, the odd new slide. I reloaded lecture 4. That had a few extra slides in, and so if you want to look at that again, you can, whatever. But I think lecture 5 is gone, but it will be there as soon as I can figure out what's going on. Quick tip about, people have asked me about, how I study for this material if you're struggling. I think one of the best things you can do is make up questions. You should be forming a group of 2 or 3 friends, and you should make up questions. After you finish today's material, go home, make up a dozen multiple choice questions on the material I'm going over, and 5 short answers. You then submit those to your friends, and they take those questions, and you take their questions, and get them wrong, get them right, or whatever. Figure out what you need to study. It's no use sitting there reading a book, or reading the note, blah blah, or just transposing your notes. You've got to test yourself. Do I actually understand what the heck he's asking? And you can make up just as good questions as I can on whatever, any material. I bet if you came up with 10 multiple choice questions, half of those will be the same questions I make up on the trigeminal nerve. So when you come to, before the exam, you've got a test bank of multiple choice and short answer questions made up by you and your friends on all the material we're going to have on the exam. You take that test then and figure out, do I know what the heck's going on? I bet if you make up 10 multiple choice questions on this material, they'd be very similar to the questions I make up. I'm no smarter on this material than you are. You can make just no, there's nothing inherently different between us. It's just that, you can make, if you're going to examine somebody on the oculomotor nerve, you're going to give your friends an exam on the oculomotor nerve. Make up 5 questions on the oculomotor nerve. Those questions, I bet, will be very similar to ones I came up with. You know the type of questions I come up with. I bet you can anticipate most of the questions I'll ask. So why aren't you making those questions up now and taking them? Simple. Don't be surprised by any question on the exam. Okay, fair enough. That's an easy way of boosting your grade, I think. Just repeat it, test yourself. Don't just read over a thing and just go into a blank haze. Process, commit it to memory, and test it. Test yourself and you'll figure out, do I really know this stuff or not? Fair enough? Okay, so today we're going to try and carry on going through some of these cranial nerves, vagal, glossopharyngeal, facial, trigeminal, whatever. But quick review what we talked about last time. Oculomotor nerve. It has parasympathetic and skeletal motor fibers in. Therefore, sometimes you'll see it referred as a pure motor cranial nerve. Sometimes you'll see it as a mixed cranial nerve. On the overhead here, whereas isn't it one of these, I think it is referred to as a mixed nerve because it has, basically who cares? It's there, it's a mixed nerve, isn't it, on this handout, or whatever. Who cares what you call it? It's what it does that you need to remember. That's the most important thing, obviously. And what it does, of course, is controls a lot of the muscles of the eyeball, the pupil, and the eyelid muscle, and the lens. Okay, the ciliary muscle that controls the shape of the lens. You need to know where it starts, the parasympathetic fibers, heading a westbound nucleus, goes to the ciliary ganglion, goes out to the pupil muscle and the ciliary muscle. Okay? You get a lesion to it, what will happen to the pupil, what will happen to the lens, what will happen to the eyeball movement. Okay, what typical lesions to this, webers, etc., those kind of lesions you'll see. Okay, so we mustn't talk about that. Trigeminal nerve, we talked about the sensory portions very early on about how those tracts go. Where was it now? This fella. How your touch and pressure are bilaterally represented on the cortices, whereas pain and temperature are unilateral, contralateral. Okay, the three divisions, ophthalmic, maxillomandibular, V1, V2, V3, we talked about that. I'm not going in order, am I? Husson's nerve, accessory nerve, we talked about SCM, know what torticollis is, which muscle is spasming, which way the head will turn, which way to stretch the person. If you have if a child or a person has a problem in the right accessory nerve, how would you stretch that muscle? How would you stretch the patient? If you have a right accessory nerve lesion, spasm, the SCM, what would you say to the patient? Or what would you do to the patient? How would you stretch them? The opposite way the muscle contracts, right? Obviously. The muscle contracts, my right SCM contracts, which way my head's going to turn? Left, and which way we're going to side bend? Right. So you're going to do the exact opposite advantage. You want to stretch that muscle, you're going to left side bend, right rotate. That's the kind of board question you might see. I've seen that. Very similar question to that in a board exam. Tongue muscles, hypoglossal nerve. Let's talk about sport. Problems with chewing, problems with swallowing, moving your food, speech issues perhaps. Long-term atrophy. You'll see one side of the tongue atrophied and ridges in it. You stick your tongue out, it deviates to the side of the lesion. The motor nerve, back to that. Trigeminal nerve. Know the five branches, the three branches there, what part of the skin they represent. Four muscles for chewing. Trigeminal neuralgia, big problem, very common. Signs, symptoms. Trigeminal neuralgia, what brings it on? Idiopathic in most cases. And one of the last things we talked about in trigeminal nerve is little reflex here. This blinking reflex here. If you touch the cornea is innervated by the trigeminal nerve. The sensation of somebody touching the cornea is picked up by the trigeminal nerve. It goes into the brainstem, and we get an interneuron going to the facial nerve that closes the eye bilaterally. Touch one eye, both eyes blink. Orbicularis oculi muscle contracts and you shut the eye down. This reflex, of course, is a brainstem reflex. Remember, a reflex does not go to the brain, does it? You're familiar with a reflex arc, right? It's made the components of reflex arc. You have a receptor, a sensory neuron, synapse, a motor neuron, an effector. That's a monosynaptic reflex. It could be in the spinal cord, it could be in the brainstem. Many of our reflexes are not monosynaptic. In other words, the sensory nerve coming in synapses with a few interneurons before it hits the motor nerve going out. But you're all familiar with a reflex arc, right? This is not a conscious sensation. You don't need a brain to do this. These reflexes are going to be found in the brainstem and or the spinal cord. The other one we mentioned, the glabellar reflex, where you tap the forehead of somebody and they'll blink a couple of times after each time you tap, you'll get this blink reaction. But after a while, a couple of 2-3 taps, it should stop. It doesn't. It's called Myerson sign. This can be a sign of frontal lobe damage, dementia, Parkinson's. Okay. I had one more, just another reflex is initiated sometimes by the trigeminal, the ciliospinal reflex. I added that a few minutes ago. This reinforces the idea of these reflexes. This is another interesting one. This tests the trigeminal nerve and the oculomotor nerve, or thoracic nerves. So there's two ways. Basically, what you do here is you pinch somebody. Okay? So why don't we try that? You can pinch somebody's cheek, but it's probably easiest way what I'll do in a clinic is if you pinch somebody's neck, it has to, not you'll kill them, but it has to be a little bit sharp pain. So if you've got a partner who doesn't mind you doing that, look in their eye and pinch the neck, squeeze the neck quickly, and look at the eye, the pupil. Get a quick squeeze. One quick squeeze. You see anything? What happened? If you do it properly, quick out like that pupil will dilate. Okay? Or you squeeze a cheek, trigeminal nerve. You squeeze the cheek, make it hurt. The unilateral, ipsilateral pupil will dilate. Briefly, boom. Did anybody see that? Yeah? It's not as easy to do it yourself. I mean, you're prepared for that. But so what's happening then? If I pinch my cheek, or somebody pinches my cheek, and my right cheek, my right pupil dilates, what's happened? How could you explain that? What nerve picks up that sensation, for example, pinching my cheek? Trigeminal, right? It's going to go to the brainstem, synapse, into neuron, coupled with what nerve? What nerve made the response? The
Facial?
oculomotor, right? I had optic, I had facial. What muscle, what nerve goes to the pupil? Oculomotor, right? The oculomotor nerve goes to the pupil, and what's it doing to it? Dilating the pupil, so it's facilitating what pathways? The sympathetic pathways going to the pupil, which we haven't talked about yet, but they piggyback on the oculomotor nerve. So basically, it's a flight or fight response. The pupil dilates, I'm hurting, I want to get out of here, whatever. So the oculomotor nerve, the sympathetic neurons piggyback on that down to the radial nerve of the radial muscle of the eye to open the pupil quickly. Okay? That's another brain reflex. It tests the brain. I mean, if it doesn't work, it might be trigeminal nerve problem. Who cares? If it doesn't work, more seriously, it could be problems with the brainstem, of course. Just like if you're trying to lighten somebody's pupil and it doesn't constrict, they could be in a big mess because they've got cerebral herniation on the brain, perhaps, on the brainstem. So these reflexes, many reflexes we can test. Very simply, they do not require a conscious brain to do this. Okay? It requires the brainstem or the spinal cord, for example, in a patellotendon knee-jerk reflex. It doesn't require. I could have my knee-jerk reflex with my head cut off. Okay? That would still work. I might be dead, but your knee-jerk reflex would work. Okay? That's the nerve. Anyone in motor control will learn how to test this electronically. You can put electrodes on this nerve and record EMG from the orbicular oculi muscle, and you get the same effect. Okay, moving on. Facial nerve. Big nerve. Quite complicated. Lots of things going on in the facial nerve. Three major components of the facial nerve. Our special sensory fibers. Basically the taste from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Special sensation. We'll look at that in more detail in a second. What's the posterior third of the tongue? Taste. What nerve is that? Anterior 2/3 is the facial, the back of the tongue is the glossopharyngeal. Okay? Not trigeminal, not hypoglossal. I've seen that put in exams before. Okay? So you've got the taste, you've got parasympathetic fibers. So you've got autonomic nervous system component to the facial nerve. These parasympathetic fibers are going to go to the sublingual and submandibular glands. Amongst other, these things down here. The sublingual and submandibular glands produce saliva. Okay? Produce saliva. And thirdly, another big, other thing. So besides the gland, the saliva gland, it also goes to the nose for nasal mucus, and the lacrimal glands for the production of what? Tears. Okay? So you've got tears, nose boogers, and saliva. Okay? That's the parasympathetic drive of the facial nerve. The third, that's the most important, but the largest component of the facial nerve, of course, is skeletal muscles. All the muscles of the rest of the face, apart from those from the trigeminal, are going to be innervated by the facial nerve. So all the muscles, there's got dozens of them in the face, all those things, I don't expect to learn all of those, all the muscles of facial expression. When I smile, curl my lip, whatever, furrow my brow, twitch my nose, whatever, all those things are facial nerve driven. Okay, let's look a little at those functions in a little more detail. Taste. Okay, so the taste buds on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue pick up this sensation. That facial nerve goes back into the pons. Okay? That first order neuron. It's going to go through a ganglion. Okay? Just like the dorsal ganglion, there's got to be a named place where those unipolar neurons have their cell bodies. In this case, it's called the geniculate ganglion. That thing in blue up here. The geniculate ganglion is equivalent to the dorsal ganglion. That's where cell bodies are found for this facial nerve. Okay? Then, let me find a better picture. The second order neuron, shown up here, takes over where this first order neuron ends. And that first order neuron ends in what's known as the nucleus solitarius, the solitary nucleus. So that is equivalent of the dorsal grey horn in the spinal cord, something like that. So that first order neuron comes in, cell bodies in the geniculate ganglion, that first order neuron ends in the nucleus solitarius. That's where it stops. The second order neuron takes over there. Okay? Just like in the spinal cord. It takes over there, crosses the midline, ascends through the brainstem to end at the VPM, the ventral posterior medial nucleus of the thalamus, of course. Everything goes to the thalamus, remember. Third order neuron, or projection neuron, what are you going to call it? Starts there, goes to the gustatory area, the primary gustation area, just like the somatosensory cortex, etc., etc. This area, remember, is at the very, very bottom of the somatosensory cortex, deep within the lateral sulcus. You can see it here. There's the lateral sulcus, there's the gustatory area right there. So that's where we get the conscious perception of taste, in that gustatory area. Okay? That's conscious perception pathways. First order neuron in, salivatory, forget that, nucleus solitarius, up to VPM, VPM out to the gustatory area in the bottom of the semisensory cortex there. That's conscious perception of taste. We have a little reflex though. So when these taste sensations hit the nucleus solitarius, you can see here, it's not represented very well, there's a little interneuron that goes from the nucleus solitarius to this nucleus here, called the superior salivatory nucleus. Where my little cursor is. The superior salivatory nucleus. Whatever, super right. The superior salivatory nucleus is right next to the nucleus solitarius, but interneuron connecting them. The superior salivatory nucleus is the start of the parasympathetic fibers that go to our saliva glands. Okay, and represented by those dotted lines there. Okay, so, in other words, I put something nice on my tongue, it tastes good, I salivate naturally, reflexively, without any conscious perception of the taste of it. You salivate. So if we look at that again, taste comes in, cell body in the geniculate ganglion, stops at nucleus solitarius, interneuron, superior salivatory nucleus, the dotted line then comes out, down the facial nerve, and because this is an autonomic nervous system, we have to have a preganglion and a postganglion, don't we? We have to have a ganglia joining those two things. So the preganglionic neurons start at the superior salivatory nucleus, so the dotted line comes out, and the end here on the submandibular ganglion. That's where the pre and post meet. Submandibular ganglion. It is sometimes called submaxillary. It's like an older term. So here, you'll see it called submaxillary or submandibular. Same thing. Different names, exactly the same thing. That's the ganglion where the preganglionic neurons connect to the postganglionic neurons. The postganglionic neurons go out, of course, and go to the submandibular and sublingual glands to produce saliva. That's how you reflexively produce saliva when you put some on the tongue. Okay? Makes sense? Okay. Motor fibers. That's skeletal muscle motor fibers. There's tons of them. There are these 5 major branches though. So it splits, this facial nerve splits up and innervates the whole face. And there's 5 major branches based on the location of those branches. And mnemonics, remember those, shown here, 12 Zulus became my clients. Okay, so you can pretend you're working in South Africa and you open the OT clinic and you have 12 Zulus who became my clients. They stand for these 5 branches here. Okay, so temporal, zygomatic, buccal or buccal, how do I pronounce it over here, mandibular and cervical. Temporal, zygomatic, buccal, mandibular, cervical. Those are 5 major branches, the big branches of the facial cranial nerve that innervates muscles of the face. Okay? And those, again, will split up and go various places. But a couple of little ones, extra ones, we perhaps should mention. The couple of branches, smaller branches, go to the digastric muscle and the stylohyoid, right at the bottom there. Can you see those? The digastric and stylohyoid. Oh, that's on this picture or not.
What was the second one?
Stylohyoid. You're printing these out, are you? These slides, or not?
No.
No? Yes? No?
No. Yeah.
Why not? I mean, I don't know, it's up to you how you want to do it. But I mean, I would, the names are all there, aren't they, obviously, on these slides. If you don't get them in class, come back and, pull them off the internet and whatever and print them out, or just write them down there and then, either way. So the digastric and stylohyoid are two little muscles that go to the hyoid bone. The digastric goes from the mandible to the hyoid bone. You know where the hyoid bone is at. You want to palpate that, yes, and move it around and grab hold of it. That U-shaped bone that's not attached to, is not articulated with any of them bone. It just hangs there by muscle, basically. That little thing can wiggle around. So digastric goes from a mandible to the hyoid bone and helps elevate the hyoid, controls the hyoid, basically. Where do you think the stylohyoid goes from and to?
The styloid process.
Styloid process in the back in here, right, hanging down here, down to the hyoid bone. Okay, this again will help elevate the hyoid bone. Okay. I'm not going to name all the muscles of the face unless you want me to. Yeah. We need to know one other little branch though, one little important motor branch. This fella here. The little branch goes to the stapedius muscle. Can you read that there? If you haven't read it. There's a little muscle called the stapedius muscle. What do you think that attaches to? The stapes, right? The stirrup in the little ossicles in the ear there. This muscle is responsible for damping. It's like a spring. It attaches the stirrup or stapes and dampens the motion of it. It doesn't vibrate like crazy. So if you were to damage that muscle or damage the facial nerve, you would get hyperacusis. Hyperacusis. What does that mean? Abnormally loud sounds. Hyperacusis sounds really loud, it shouldn't be. The thing is, vibrates like crazy in the ear, and it's not getting dampened down at all. Okay, let's think clinically then. What's the most common reason for damage to the facial nerve? What's the most common damage you'll see in the facial nerve?
Trauma.
From? Say again?
Trauma.
Trauma? No. I mean, yeah, you could get somebody... Pardon? No. Bell's palsy. Heard of Bell's palsy? Yes? No? Never heard of Bell's palsy? Bell's palsy. Quite common. Has anybody had it? One person? Anybody else? What this is, unfortunately, it's usually idiopathic, of course, like most things are, unfortunately. Unknown etiology, usually it's unilateral. You can get bilateral Bell's palsy, but that's much rarer, quite rare. Unilateral is typical, 20 to 40 years old, something like that. That's when you're most prone to get it. Early adulthood kind of thing. If you saw bilateral facial problems, what would you think? What would you think of another disease? Myasthenia gravis, yes. Bilateral facial issues, generally you're thinking myasthenia gravis. Unilateral facial issues, your first instinct should probably be Bell's palsy. So here, basically, your facial nerve is damaged. Just lesions of facial nerve, and depending on where, sometimes it's in the temporal bone, not shown there, but sometimes they'll go and they think it's inflamed with where it comes to the temporal bone. They'll go and route it out. They'll go and drill a hole and make that hole bigger, kind of thing, trying to prevent the impingement. Severe cases, the patients, so these muscles, any or all of these muscles can be paralyzed or not working properly one side. So your orbicularis oculi, this muscle around the eye, you can't close your eye. Even when you're sleeping, the eye is open. So you have no protective blinking, this kind of stuff. Your eye is always open. You have loss of production of tears, right? So all those functions we talked about can be damaged. Loss of tears, eye open, problem, infection. So you'll either artificially lubricate, you have artificial tears, you squirt in your eye. Severe cases, they'll put a patch over. Or I had a patient who had their eyelid sewn shut. They'll stitch the eyelid together like this. And they'll walk around like that with their stitches in the eyelid to protect the eye because they've got no tears and they've got no blinking, etc., and their eyes open at night sleeping. It doesn't usually, it lasts a few months. It can last a year or so. So that's why in those long-term situations you'll stitch the eye shut. So the facial muscle expressions are going to be weird. You're going to have a grotesque grin. If the person tries to smile, you might have pictures of that. So he's one side of his face is drooping because he's lost tone in his face on one side there. When you try to smile, it will look weird. You can't frown. If you try to whistle, you can't purse your lips. You try to blow out. One side of the cheek will blow out here because the buccinator muscles are all paralyzed. So rather than going like that, you go, one will be all puffed out because the muscle is dead over here. And you can't close your lips very well. That's a slide showing a submandibular gland. I should have shown that. So you have this muscle around the mouth, your orbicularis oris muscle. That circular muscle allows you to keep your mouth closed, close your lips. So what happens there, if that's paralyzed, even though they don't produce much saliva, there's another gland we look at in a minute that produces saliva. You have lots of saliva from the submandibular glands, but you'll still get some saliva from other glands. So what happens is your lips can't close on one side, and so you'll drool. Your saliva, what saliva you've got, might drool out the corner of your mouth because you can't shut those lips there. Just like it feels like when you've gone to the dentist, your face is all numb and it's all, paralyzed. You can't wrinkle your brow. You can't do any of the normal facial expressions you'd see. Unfortunately, there's no known cure for this. In some cases there is, and if there's Lyme disease, you've heard of Lyme disease, right? That often can result in Bell's palsy. Sometimes Lyme disease results in Bell's palsy. Patients who contracted Lyme disease can end up getting Bell's palsy for some reason. And there, of course, there is a cure, oral antibiotics. You all know about Lyme disease, right? That spirochete infection, medietic, nasty thing to get. There was a girl in the news the other day, wasn't there? A little girl, 9 years old, who's had it and it was rheumatoid arthritis, and she went to a specialist in Boston years later. What did they finally figure out what it was? We had a student of ours who graduated, a PT a few years ago. She went down to Harbour and they owned a hotel right downtown there. She had this weird thing, nobody figured out, achy limbs, arthritis. It's all these specialists. 2-3 years later, they diagnosed with Lyme disease. If you don't get it quickly, it's a mess. And she actually moved to Florida for the weather because she couldn't handle the weather here because of this long-standing Lyme disease she'd had. Nasty thing to get. And I don't know why it's not picked up on earlier, to be honest. If the patient comes in and has got these weird, achy joints, etc., it looks like rheumatoid arthritis, and they don't, they do tests and it's not rheumatoid arthritis, I would think straight away Lyme disease. It is something that will affect, it can be pretty serious if you don't get it quickly. If you get it quickly, you're okay, but if you leave it for years, then it can be a nightmare to try and treat. Okay. Let's finish off the facial nerve with this little diagram. Okay, we haven't mentioned yet anything about the corticobulbar tract to any of the nerves we talked about. We'll get to that at the very end, sort of thing. So the corticobulbar tract, of course, is the upper motor neurons, the tract that goes to the start of the cranial nerves. Okay? So, this is unique to the facial nerve of all our cranial nerves. So, the muscles in the lower half of the face are supplied just like the spinal cord. In other words, my left lower face, now let's look at this one here. This bloke's right lower face here, the right hand lower face, if you follow, this is his lower motor neuron here, this dotted line, right? This goes to the nucleus within the brainstem. And where does that get its feed from? These upper motor neurons from the contralateral hemisphere. Okay? So this is our corticobulbar tract here. So the corticobulbar tract, motor neurons, upper motor neurons from my right, in this case left hemisphere, is supplying my right lower face. Fair enough? And opposite right hemisphere supplies my left lower face. Just as in my right hemisphere supplies my left biceps. Same as that. Contralateral control. Fine. That's typical of what we've seen in the body. But we also get this issue. Look at the upper face on the right hand side is supplied by the left motor cortex. Fair enough. But look at this fella here. The right hemisphere also supplies the nuclei, the lower motor neurons of the right upper face. So in other words, the faces on the upper face, the muscles on the top of the face have a bilateral supply. In other words, both motor cortices supply those muscles. The lower face only gets a contralateral supply. Does that make sense? So again, right hemisphere supplies left lower face. Left hemisphere supplies right lower face. Upper face of my left hand side is supplied by my right hemisphere and my left hemisphere. And the same on the other side. Okay? So, if I was to get a lower motor neuron lesion, which is the facial nerve proper, in this case, let's say on the left-hand side, what part of the face would be damaged? If you took out the whole of the left lower motor neuron going to the left face, what muscles will be damaged? All of them. All of them. It's like saying if I cut my right muscutaneous nerve, what muscles in the right arm would be affected? All of them. All those supplied by that, the biceps, brachialis, whatever. Okay? So a lower motor neuron lesion in the facial nerve will cause unilateral palsy of the whole face. However, a supranuclear lesion, as it's called here, or, in other words, an upper motor neuron lesion. What I mean by supranuclear means above these nuclei here that start the facial nerve here. So a supranuclear lesion, or an upper motor neuron lesion, or a corticobulbar tract lesion, or a motor cortex lesion, all same thing basically, they all cause the same problem. What would happen if I lose my left motor cortex? What would you see in that patient?
Loss of the contralateral lower half.
Exactly. You'd see contralateral loss of the right hand lower face. The upper face is spared. The upper face muscles are spared because of this line here. They get supply from the ipsilateral cortex. Very good for your patients with stroke. That is why you'll see in patients with stroke, the upper face is usually fine. Because they're getting supply from the other side, the same side. The lower face wouldn't be. Okay? If you've got a bilateral lesion, of course, then you would have problems in the lower face. What artery is that? What artery supplies this part of the motor cortex out here? The middle cerebral artery, yeah. That's your middle cerebral artery out there. Okay? One last little clinical tidbit you might see in a facial nerve. Okay, if you get a short circuit between your sensory nerves from taste and the autonomic fibers going to the lacrimal glands, okay, you can get what's known as crocodile tears syndrome. Crocodile tears syndrome. You taste something good and you cry. And it's not a good pint of English ale. You taste something good and it makes the person cry. Where would that lesion have to be? Where is that short circuit? Where do those two nerve pathways touch? If you look on this diagram, the only place they can touch is here. So here the taste fibers coming up this way, they meet with the fibers going out to the lacrimal glands proximal to the geniculate ganglion. So in this little area here, if you get a short circuit proximal to the geniculate ganglion, you can get this weird thing where the person cries, tears are produced after they taste something. That can't be anywhere else. It has to be very close because that's the only place proximal to the geniculate ganglion where those two nerves come close together. And basically you get a short circuit of the system there, and there you get this tearing when you taste something. Okay? Big nerve, lots of functions, lots of pieces to it. Very quite easy to diagnose. You just have a person make a facial expression. They can't do it on one side of the face. They get a unilateral or a problem. You're going to think that facial nerve issue, probably Bell's palsy. It might not be, but whatever. That's one of the commonest things. You can test their taste. You can test their muscles. Tears will be affected, mucus production will be affected. Okay, remember all these, I drew this diagram in here, where is it now? The last few minutes ago, well, might help you. This is the diagram I grabbed out of the very last, or next to last, I don't know which it is, lecture series on the autonomic nervous system. But this basically, this shows very simple description of the autonomic nervous system, and you can see these are the four ganglion for the parasympathetic nervous system. These are the nerves, the four nerves that come out of the cranial nerves that are part of the parasympathetic system. These are the nuclei where they start. Does that make sense? That's the cartoon version we've been talking about. We haven't come across all these yet, but you can see the submaxillary ganglion there and the ciliary ganglion there for the nerves we've gone over so far. Alright, let's move on. Glossopharyngeal nerve. Glossus means what?
Tongue.
Tongue, pharynx, throat. So you think tongue, throat when you think of this nerve, okay? Probably actually four parts. 4 parts of this nerve. taste. Neurons from the posterior third of the tongue. Anterior is facial, posterior glossopharyngeal. That's the tongue part. There are parasympathetic fibers, just like the facial nerve, going to a saliva gland. Okay? And that gland is known as a parotid gland. Up here. The parotid gland. Or there's a big parotid gland here. Big gland production of saliva. Okay? And that gland is innervated by, of course, the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic supply, and its ganglion is the otic ganglion here. Okay, that's the ganglion that supplies the postganglionic neurons to the parotid gland. And you can see it, where the heck is it? There as well. That's what we're looking at here, the otic ganglion. Okay? The nucleus where these neurons start, these preganglionic neurons start, is what? Shown there. I can't read it. The inferior salivatory nucleus. Okay? The superior salivatory nucleus is the start of the facial nerve, saliva. The inferior salivatory nucleus is the start of the parasympathetic fibers within the glossopharyngeal nerve going to the parotid gland. So you've got two cranial nerves that go to saliva glands. Facial, glossopharyngeal. Where they start, superior and inferior salivatory nucleus. They go to the submandibular gland or the otic gland. Fair enough? Okay, so we've got taste, we've got saliva production, we have sensory neurons, some important sensory neurons from the throat. The soft palate. The eustachian tube. You know what this eustachian tube is? Yes? You know what that is? Yes? No? Eustachian tube? The one that, you blow to equalise the pressure in the middle ear for diving between the ear and the back of your throat, right? When your ears pop. Yes? Eustachian tube? Okay. Also, very importantly, the carotid sinus. It's innervated. Sensory neurons from the carotid sinus are part of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Come back for a minute. And finally, there's a skeletal muscle supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. One muscle here, the stylopharyngeus. The stylopharyngeus muscle is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. Another muscle involved in swallowing. A lot of our cranial nerves, unfortunately, have swallowing functions within them. So when a person has difficulty swallowing, it can be a bit tricky to figure out which nerve is responsible for the problems in swallowing. Okay. Just like the facial nerve, we have a little reflex to produce saliva. Now remember, we went to the facial nerve salivary process. Here, you put them on the back of the tongue. Okay? It's going to come up through the first of the neuron. It's going to have its ganglion here. So this is equivalent to the dorsal ganglion. This is the petrosal ganglion. P-T-R-O-S-A-L. The petrosal ganglion is equivalent to the dorsal ganglion. That's where we find that cell body of that unipolar neuron. Okay? Okay, you can see it coming in. And it's going to synapse, going to end in this solitary nucleus again, just like the facial nerve, the solitary tract sometimes it's called, a little group of nuclei here. We then get, just like the facial nerve, we get a interneuron going to our preganglion neurons. And that, they start, as I say, for in the inferior salivatory nucleus. That then goes down to the saliva glands, this dotted line here, via the otic ganglion to produce saliva. Is that on this diagram? No, it's not there. Conscious sensation of taste exactly the same as facial nerve. Back of the tongue, up to the solitary nucleus solitarius, crossover, VPM, somatosensory cortex, bottom of it, gustatory area. So exactly the same pathways occur for your glossopharyngeal nerve for taste as the facial nerve for conscious perception of taste. Because the same pathways, once they hit the brainstem. First, second, third order neurons. Okay? Why do we have sensory fibers going to the carotid sinus?
To sense the blood pressure.
Sense blood pressure and what else? So carotid sinus, you know where the carotid sinus is, right? Yes, no? No? The carotid sinus is that junction between the internal and external carotid. So your common carotid comes up the neck. It's about the junction of the mandible, about here. We'll talk about maybe more when we look at the cerebral blood flow. But it basically splits into a Y shape. And at that junction between the internal and external carotid arteries is a kind of a swelling area. That's the carotid sinus. And within there are baroreceptors. You've heard of that term, yes? No? Baroreceptors, yeah? They sense blood pressure. So change in blood pressure, where also do we find baroreceptors? In the aortic arch, remember? In the aorta. The aortic arch, the baroreceptors in there to sense the blood pressure in the aorta itself. But these are baroreceptors found in the carotid sinus, and they will tell the brainstem via the glossopharyngeal nerve what's going on in terms of blood pressure. You'll also find a carotid body in the carotid sinus. What does a carotid body sense? Come on, you should know this from your MP, surely, like whatever. Carotid body, what does that sense? Through a group of cells, specialized cells within, hanging out in the sinus that detects the partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 a bit, but it's primarily an O2 sensor. It senses CO2 as well, but it's the partial pressure of oxygen is the biggest stimulator for this carotid body. Okay, so you have change in blood pressure, change in O2 partial pressure. So this carotid sinus and carotid body are continually sampling pressure and blood and O2 within the blood via the glossopharyngeal nerve. They send it up to the brainstem, where they end, those neurons end again in this nucleus solitarius region. Okay? Very quickly, you get an interneuron from the nucleus solitarius going to what nerve do you think we need to get to quickly?
Vagus?
Vagal nerve. The vagal nerve. The vagus. So there's a direct connection, an interneuron between the glossopharyngeal nerve and the vagal nerve. Glossopharyngeal nerve senses blood pressure, senses oxygen. You need to change because your blood pressure is low. or high, whatever. And what you do then, you send an interneuron to the vagal nerve. So you drop your heart rate. Remember the vagal nerve is going to do what to heart rate? Decrease or increase? Again, what? Decrease. Remember, it's parasympathetic fibers. You've got high blood pressure sensed by the carotid sinus, the baroreceptors. I need to lower that pretty quick. And it's the glossopharyngeal that senses that. It tells the vagal nerve quickly, stop, pumping out, close the, decrease blood pressure. Decrease blood pressure. Okay? Slow the heart down. Okay? As I said, another clinical thing, the glossopharyngeal has sensory receptors in the throat. Okay? It senses food going down the throat, down the esophagus, etc., etc. If you touch the back of the throat, you either can gag or swallow. So that swallowing reflex and the gag reflex are both initiated by the glossopharyngeal nerve. And usually it'll synapse with the vagal nerve sometimes, or whatever nerve we'll talk about later, to initiate that swallowing, etc., etc. It also, important part of this reflex, or this part of the sensation of the glossopharyngeal nerve, is to close off the epiglottis. When you feel something going down your throat, you want to close the epiglottis, don't you? Because that stops what?
Food from going down your airway.
Food going to the lungs. Right? So that reflex of the shutting the epiglottis so you don't aspirate food into your lungs is initiated by the glossopharyngeal nerve. That's why, for example, you go into general surgery, you won't eat for 8, 10, 12 hours before. Because when you go under a general anesthetic, that general anesthetic typically suppresses that reflex. It deadens the glossopharyngeal nerve reflex. So in other words, if you were to, in surgery, puke, because you've eaten, a good hearty breakfast before you have your surgery, eggs, bacon, sausages, etc., etc., and you puke it up, you're not going to put the epiglottis over your trachea to stop it going down into your lungs. So basically you could vomit into your lungs because that reflex has been suppressed by the anesthesia, glossopharyngeal is not there. Gone. That's why you're told not to eat for 10 hours before you have it go under, just in case, so you won't throw up anything. There's nothing to throw up. You don't want that food going down the lungs. Okay? Let's talk about one more nerve, which is quite linked to the glossopharyngeal nerve. We're going to come back to this nerve in much more detail when we talk about the autonomic nervous system. Okay? Vagal nerve, big one, big important nerve, okay. We've got two of them, of course. Vagus nerve means what in Latin? A vagrant is somebody who does what? Wanders around all over the place. The vagus means it wanders. It wanders all around the chest and the upper abdominal regions. All those organs in the thorax and upper abdominal regions are going to get their parasympathetic supply via the vagal nerve. Okay? So that's probably the most important part of this, is this parasympathetic supply. It does, however, have a skeletal motor supply within it. Normal skeletal muscles are supplied by the vagal nerve. Okay? And these are in the throat and the voice box area. So many, you can see them all labelled here, but I'm not going to expect you to memorize all these names. But lots of weird naming muscles around the throat, around the larynx, larynx, supplied by the vagal nerve. So if you damage the vagal nerve, you can have problems in speech. Okay? Your voice changes. Often that person will present with slurred speech, kind of a dysphonia. Their voice box is not coordinated well. You would have problems swallowing, and that would be called dysphagia. Your gag reflex would be a problem. Your epiglottis reflex would be a problem. Because those muscles, even though the sensation of the stuff going down the throat is glossopharyngeal nerve, it's the vagal nerve that swallows or gags or shuts the epiglottis off. Okay, so one is the sensory portion of it, the vagal is the motor portion. The glossopharyngeal senses something going down, the glossopharyngeal swallows because of, the glossopharyngeal senses, the vagal is the motor component of it. Okay? We have sensory fibers within the vagal nerve too. All those organs that the parasympathetic nerve supplies, shown some of them here, diaphragm, spleen, pancreas, kidneys, livers, blah, 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 heart, etc. All those organs have sensory fibers coming out of them, or at least around the membranes around them. And those sensations come back up to the vagal nerve. So your sensation of your stomach being full, okay, that's your vagal nerve doing that for you. That carotid body reflex, that's the vagal nerve, remember. Glossopharyngeal senses the blood. The vagal nerve is the thing that changes the heart rate. Okay? What would it do to breathing? What does the vagal nerve, if you increase vagal nerve supply, what happens to the breathing? Slows down. You take less breaths, shallower breaths. Remember, parasympathetic supply, rest and digest system. And we'll come back again, I said, when we look at the autonomic nervous system in more detail. Everything shuts down basically, except for what increases?
The digestion.
The peristalsis. The stomach churns away more. Okay? You get more stomach, rest and digest. Shut things down, but let the stomach go for it. Mucus in the bronchial tree will increase. Bronchial diameter will decrease. Lungs sort of shut down and make more mucus. Shut down, but the sympathetic supply comes from our spinal nerves. We talk about that when we get to the autonomic nervous system. Last thing, last slide today, unless you want 10 more. This is a very common issue you'll find if you're working in acute rehab, inpatient, you will see this very commonly. Vasovagal syncope. Syncope means to faint. Okay? It's sometimes called vasovagal reflex, vasovagal attack, vasovagal response. What else? Emotional fainting. Emotional fainting is sometimes called. I'll give you one more. Neurally mediated hypotension. Neurally mediated hypotension. Okay, all the same thing. Vasovagal syncope. This is basically somebody goes for a blood draw. They see blood and they faint right in front of you. They keel over because they can't handle, or they're in a high stress situation. They just faint. Or you get somebody a patient out of the bed, and they get all nervous, and they keel over, and they drop to the floor right in front of you, even though you're trying to guard them. Very common to have a vasovagal attack. And there's various causes of this. That's the thing. You can have the left-hand side of the diagram doing this. You can have emotions, pain, thoughts, etc., from the cerebral cortex. Okay? You go into the doctor's office all panicking. I had one, we do the, what do you call it, the open house day, where students come in, they look at all our equipment. I had people doing EMG, electromyography, right? You put electrodes on us, putting on some kids, literally, to show the parents what we can do. You know, a 10-year-old kid, I put some electrodes on the 10-year-old kid, his brother, who was 18, fainted. Oh my God. I've killed somebody in open house. You know, but this wires going to this muscle caused his brother to faint. And sorry, you know, his mother goes, oh, that's fine, he does it all the time, he goes to the doctor and he faints. Any medical situation, he faints. Sees blood, he faints. Sees a needle, he faints. That's a very strong vasovagal syncope. You can see what happens, the cerebral cortex connects to the anterior hypothalamus, which, as we know before, increases parasympathetic activity. Vasomotor center in the medulla, this is where we start the vagal nerve. I didn't mention the nucleus, I'll get to that next class maybe. And then you go down to the vagal nerve, down to you cause vasodilation, blood pressure drops, the kid keels over. Why do you faint? What's the purpose of fainting? It's deliberate. Well, I mean, why do you want to faint? Why is it good to faint? Protect yourself. Low blood pressure. Baroreceptors detect low blood pressure. You want blood to the head. You want to keep the blood supplied, the brain supplied with blood. So what do? You put the person on his back, and the blood goes to his head. If your blood pools in your lower legs, and you know, you're standing on guard in the military, whatever, for hours, you know, watching the Queen walk by. I saw some bloke the other day did this. Blood pooling in the lower legs, no movement, no vascular pump, getting the blood back up to the heart, to the brain. So what does he do? The brain goes, oh, I'm not getting any blood, I need to put this bloke on his back, quick. And you put them down, and now blood flows from the legs down to the head, and his brain can survive. It's a good thing in this situation to be able to faint. So the other way the other influence here is the baroreceptors, of course, do this. The baroreceptors feed into this. Aortic arch coincides, feed into this loop, and we can get this loss. The person will faint, the heartbeat drops, they go white. The blood is taken from the periphery. They lose consciousness in severe cases. This sometimes runs in families, that people get this vasovagal issue where they'll lose consciousness and orthostatic hypotension. People stand up quickly, right? Keel over. Very prevalent in some of your patients in the hospital. Watch out for this. Questions? Did we do enough today or not?
Yeah.
We'll come back, I'll go over the last parts again. Make up some questions tonight on the material. Multiple choice and short answer.